Have you ever wondered why bad things happen to good people? Why do good people suffer while the wicked prosper? Why does it sometimes seem that God remains silent when we need Him most? This isn't a new question. The answer lies within the Bible. Its pages offer a profound journey into understanding faith and justice. In the arid land of Uz, there lived a man named Job, whose story is considered the greatest test of faith ever told. Job was neither a king nor a prophet. He was simply a righteous and good man. His reverence for God was so great that he never strayed towards evil. He was the most upright and honest person the earth had known. But Job wasn't just a man of faith. He was also a man of abundance. His wealth was immense, with hundreds of lands full of cattle and an army of servants working in his house. He was the most prosperous man in the East. No one could compare to him. But his greatest treasure was his family. 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. They lived together in joy, celebrating feasts in their homes, enjoying all that God had given them. Yet, despite all his abundance, Job did not sleep peacefully. Each morning, before the first light of dawn pierced the sky, he would already be on his feet, deep in prayer. With steady hands, he offered burnt offerings for each of his children, for deep within his soul, a worrisome thought tormented him. Perhaps one of my children has sinned. Maybe in their heart they have cursed God. Job understood something that few did. He knew how fragile blessings can be, and so every day without fail, he interceded for them with the flame of sacrifice, not out of fear, but out of love for God and his family. But at that very moment, someone was watching him from the heavens, and soon his perfect world was about to crumble. The heavens opened into an eternal court. The sons of God presented themselves before the throne, entities of light and power, beings who gazed upon the vastness of creation. Among them, a shadow walked with unwavering steps. Satan, the wanderer, the accuser, the one who never rests. The Lord gazed upon him, and his voice thundered with indescribable power. "Where have you come from?" Satan replied, "From roaming the earth, from wandering through it." And it was true. His eyes had witnessed everything. He had seen kings rise and fall, cities blossom and turn to ashes. He had watched hearts waver, men sell their souls for a handful of gold, and the righteous become traitors. But among all, there was one who stood firm. The Lord knew this. He spoke of him with conviction. "Have you not seen my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, blameless, upright, God-fearing, and shunning evil." Then Satan retorted, "Does Job fear God for nothing? You have protected him and blessed him in every way. You have built an invisible hedge around him, safeguarding his home, his family, and his wealth. Everything he touches prospers, every sheep, every camel, every servant, and you're surprised he remains faithful. But take away everything he possesses, destroy his wealth, snatch away his children, make him taste the dust of ruin, and you will see how he curses you to your face." The challenge was set, but the Lord responded firmly. "Everything he has is in your hands, only do not harm him." An invisible whisper spread through the heavenly assembly. The adversary had been granted permission. Without delay, Satan turned and vanished. The wager had been accepted. Job's fate was sealed. His faith was to endure the most brutal test any man had ever faced. The next day, everything seemed calm at Job's house. His children were gathered for a feast, celebrating, laughing, sharing bread and wine. In the fields, oxen plowed the soil, donkeys grazed peacefully, servants tended the herds. Everything appeared in order. But suddenly disaster struck without warning. A servant burst into Job's house, breathless, terror etched on his face. With a trembling voice he announced, "Master, the Sabaeans attacked. They took your oxen and donkeys, killed the servants with the sword. I alone escaped to bring you the news." A chill ran down Job's spine. Before he could respond, another man burst in, panting, "Master, fire fell from the sky. A fire, a storm of flames. Your sheep and your shepherds have been consumed. Nothing remains. Only I escaped to tell you." Job could barely breathe. Fire from the sky. Was it judgment? A sign? But then another messenger burst in, nearly stumbling with desperation written on his face. "Sir, the Chaldeans attacked in 3 bands. Your camels have been stolen. Your servants all slain by the sword. Only I escaped to tell you." Job felt the ground open beneath his feet. Everything he owned, his entire legacy, reduced to ashes in mere moments. But the worst was yet to come. A 4th messenger entered, but he did not speak. His face conveyed what his words could not. "Sir, your children." Job clung to his seat, his heart pounding with terrifying force. "Your children were in the eldest son's house, eating, drinking. A great wind came from the desert. It struck the house from all 4 corners, and it collapsed. They all perished. Only I escaped to bring you the news." Job heard nothing else. The world seemed to stop. The weight of sorrow pulled him into a darkness deeper than death. In an instant, he had lost everything, every possession, his entire family. Yet, Job did not cry out. He did not curse himself or God. Instead, he rose slowly. With trembling hands, he tore his robe, and with a solemn expression, he took a knife and passed the blade over his head. Locks of his hair fell to the ground. It was an act of mourning, of surrender, of absolute acknowledgement that his life, his power, his fortune, his lineage, all had been reduced to ashes. Then he fell to the ground, pressed his face into the dirt, and worshipped. His voice, broken by grief, echoed in the silence as he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return there." And then he declared, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." This is the greatest lesson in faith. Job had just lost everything, but instead of rebelling, he surrendered to the loss. There was no complaint, no reproach, no demand for explanations. Job didn't understand why all of this was happening to him, but instead of turning away from God, he drew closer. He bowed down and worshipped. He acknowledged that everything he possessed, including his own family, was a gift from God and not something he owned by right. This was his greatest victory. Job's faith sustained him through utter disaster and grew even stronger. And this is the true meaning of Christian faith. Absolute trust in God sustains you even more in the worst of times. In Matthew 7, we read about 2 houses, one built on the rock and another on the sand. When the storm came, only the house on the rock remained standing. In his misfortune, Job worshipped and overcame Satan's test because his faith was not dependent on what God gave him, but on who God was. But Satan was not satisfied with his defeat. Days passed and the heavens opened once again. The heavenly court gathered, and Satan appeared once more among the sons of God. The Lord looked at him, and his voice thundered with authority, "Where do you come from?" Satan flashed a sly smile, bowing slightly as if keeping a dark secret. from roaming the earth and walking upon it. The Lord observed him, fully aware of his true intentions. Satan had tested Job and had failed. The most righteous man on earth had withstood the initial assault without breaking. Thus, God posed the question that would disarm him. Have you considered my servant Job? Despite all that you took from him, he still maintains his integrity. There is no one like him on earth, a perfect and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. You incited me to ruin him without reason, yet he remains steadfast. The Lord's words struck the accuser like a hammer. Job had triumphed in the first trial, and it was a humiliation for Satan. But the enemy was not about to give up. With eyes blazing with fury, he stepped forward and said, "Skin for skin." The Lord looked at him with displeasure and replied, "A man will give everything he has to save his own life." Satan grinned slyly, having found the weak spot. "Stretch out your hand, touch his flesh and bone, and you'll see how he curses you to your face," he retorted. The angels remained silent. The challenge had been issued. But the Lord did not break his gaze. He knew Job's heart. "He is in your hands," he declared, "but do not lay a finger on his life." Without wasting time, Satan descended in fury. There were no more riches to destroy, no more children to take away. Now, he would strike his body. Within hours, Job was ravaged by a terrible disease. Skin that once glowed with health and blessing turned into a landscape of open, festering sores. From the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, pain enveloped him like a shroud of agony. Fever consumed him, his skin peeled off in shreds, and the itching burned like fire in his flesh. He couldn't walk without his body aching from agony. He couldn't sleep without the nightmare persisting. All he could do was sit in the dust and ashes. There, broken, forgotten, and disfigured, Job took a piece of broken pottery and began to scrape himself with it. The pain was excruciating. Days passed, and the man who was once great had become a shadow of his former self. News of his suffering had spread. All of his honor had vanished. He was no longer the greatest man in the East. Now he was a human wreck, a man consumed by leprosy and desolation. Everyone who had once known him had abandoned him. But his wife, she remained. She had watched him lose everything. She saw how his wealth vanished and how their children were buried. And now she saw her husband reduced to a living corpse. Her heart was torn apart. She had reached her limit. She approached him with tears in her eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Do you still hold on to your integrity? Curse God and die." This was the final blow. The enemy couldn't make Job blaspheme, so he used his wife's voice. Job closed his eyes. He knew she was broken too, but his faith didn't waver an inch. He looked up and replied, "You speak like a foolish woman." She stared at him, stunned. "What? Shall we accept only the good from God and not the bad?" Job's test wasn't just about losing everything. It was about seeing if his faith would survive when absolutely nothing was left. And Job didn't fall. He stood firm amidst relentless pain. The tale of Job's tragedy spread like wildfire across the region. 3 men, longtime friends and counselors, heard the news and were horrified. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar dropped everything and set out together to see their friend Job. They wanted to comfort him, cry with him, and understand what had happened, but nothing could prepare them for what they were about to see. From a distance, they spotted a figure among the ashes, a man seated on the ground, his body covered in sores, his skin torn, his eyes lost in emptiness. They stared at him, trying to recognize him, but they couldn't. That couldn't be Job. This wasn't the most respected man in the East, the wise, the prosperous, the one blessed by God. This man was merely a shadow of who he once was. And then their hearts broke. Unable to hold back, they raised their voices and wept loudly. The lament was so heart-wrenching that servants, travelers, and the inhabitants of Uz stopped to listen. Grief consumed them, and they tore their garments as a sign of mourning. But it wasn't enough. They couldn't just remain with their tears. With trembling hands, they took dust from the ground and threw it over their heads, as if by covering themselves with the earth, they could share in their friend's burden. There were no words. What do you say to someone in such deep pain? What words could comfort a man who had lost everything? For 7 days and 7 nights, they sat together in complete silence. Job said nothing. Neither did they. They understood that the deepest sorrow cannot be comforted with words. Sometimes all you can do is be there. And though they believed their silence was a kind of solace, soon words would come, and with them an even greater challenge. Then the silence of 7 days and 7 nights was shattered in the most heartbreaking way. Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. He did not curse God. He did not curse his friends. He cursed the day he was born. With a broken voice and a distant gaze, he breathed a lament that shook both earth and sky. May the day of my birth perish. Let the moment I was conceived vanish from history. His friends' eyes widened in horror. They had never heard such words from him. The Job they knew was gone. His voice was that of a man with no reason left to go on, a man who saw no purpose in his existence. He didn't ask for answers. He didn't ask for justice. He wished he had never existed. His pain knew no pause. His suffering found no respite. Why didn't I perish in the womb? Why didn't my first breaths become my last? If I had died before being born, I would be at peace now. He longed to turn back time, to vanish before his birth, yet he still breathed, still trapped in a body that suffered, in a life that no longer held meaning. Why is light given to those in misery? Why allow life to those who no longer wish to exist? Job's words were the voice of a soul crushed by suffering, but death did not come. God did not grant him release. His chest heaved with each sob. He no longer ate. He no longer slept. He no longer hoped for anything. For what I feared has befallen me. I found no peace. I felt no safety. Never felt truly at ease, yet still turmoil came to me. His friends looked at him in stunned silence. The quiet after Job's lament was thick, yet it didn't last long. Eliphaz, the Temanite, the eldest of the 3 friends, couldn't hold back any longer. He had listened to his friend's suffering but couldn't comprehend it. He gazed at Job, the man who had once been his advisor, his mentor, his inspiration. He couldn't remain silent. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. You taught many. You strengthened the weak. Those who stumbled, you lifted with your words. Those who fell, you supported with encouragement. And now that calamity has struck you, you crumble. Isn't your fear of God your confidence? Wasn't the integrity of your life your hope? His tone was probing, as if Job himself had forgotten what he once preached. Reflect, Job. Has an innocent ever perished? The other 2 friends watched, nodding silently. Eliphaz's logic was clear. God is just. God punishes the wicked. If Job was suffering, then he must have done something. The words were like a poisoned dart. He wasn't directly accusing Job, but the doubt hung in the air. If Job was suffering, he must have sown something wrong. He continued, "They perish at the breath of God, consumed by the blast of his anger. The lion's roars fade, the growls of the beast grow weak, its teeth are broken, and the old lion dies for lack of prey." There was a moment of silence, and then his tone shifted. His eyes seemed to cloud over as he recalled something he believed was revealed to him in a vision. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can a human be purer than their Creator? If God does not place full trust in his servants, if he finds flaws even among his angels, what must he think of us, mere humans? Eliphaz hadn't directly insulted his friend, but he had ensnared him in a web of harsh and unforgiving logic. His words hinted that Job must have done something to deserve his suffering, that perhaps his own pride had blinded him to his faults. Job, the just man, now sat in ashes, and that could only mean one thing: no one is blameless before God. Eliphaz continued to speak, his voice firm, but tinged with a note of caution. Job had cried out to the heavens with his lament, but Eliphaz regarded him with skepticism. "Now, go ahead and shout, if you will," he said. "Will anyone answer you?" His words were harsh, almost defiant. "To which saint do you think you can turn, Job? Who will you seek in your desperation? Suffering is not spontaneous like grass from the ground. It is not random. It is not unjust. It has a purpose." His tone was resolute. Suffering was a part of human existence. No one could escape it. But then his tone shifted. "If I were in your position, Job," he said, "I would seek God. I would entrust my cause to him." Eliphaz lifted his eyes to the heavens, as if beholding the greatness of God. He performs great deeds, unfathomable, countless wonders. He frustrates the plans of the cunning, confounds their schemes, catches the wise in their own craftiness, and thwarts the designs of the wicked. Therefore, the man whom God corrects is blessed. Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, Job. God is the one who wounds, but also the one who heals. He inflicts the injury, and he himself binds it up. In 6 troubles he will deliver you, and in the 7th evil shall not touch you. In famine he will save you from death. In war he will deliver you from the sword. You will be safe from the scourge of the tongue. When destruction comes, you will laugh. You need not fear the beasts of the field, for even they will be at peace with you. He crossed his arms and looked at Job intently. "This isn't just my opinion, Job. We've investigated it. We've seen it with our own eyes." Then, with a final sigh, he declared, "Hear it and understand. This is for your own good." The words hung in the air. The message was clear. If Job accepted that his suffering was God's correction, he would find restoration. But if he persisted in his complaint, he would only prolong his misery. The other 2 friends remained silent, expectant. Job lifted his gaze, his face covered in dust and his eyes sunken from suffering. His pain couldn't be explained with human arguments nor justified by his friend's logic. So with a deep sigh and a voice laden with anguish, he replied, "If my complaint and torment could be weighed with justice, if they were placed on a scale, you would see they are heavier than the sand of the sea. That is why my words are hasty, for the burden I carry is unbearable." He paused, struggling to hold back the pain that seeped into his voice. "Oh, if only God would grant what I long for. If he would allow me to die and be done with all this. If God crushed me, It would be my only solace, because at least I would know I haven't denied his words. It was a terrifying wish, not for relief, not for restoration. He just wanted God to utterly destroy him. Yet the torment persisted, death did not come, and patience had run its course. How much more can I endure? Do I have the strength of rocks? Is my flesh made of bronze? I have no strength left, not even to care for myself. Job looked up and met the gaze of his friends. Anger flared in his eyes. "Those who suffer hope to find comfort from a companion," he said bitterly. "But you have betrayed me. You have seen me in my torment, and instead of supporting me, you have stepped back in fear. Have I asked for help? Have I requested any of your wealth? Have I pleaded for deliverance from the oppressor?" Silence settled over the group. Job didn't need anything from them. He just wanted understanding. Job raised his voice, and with a vacant look he exclaimed, "I prefer death over continuing to breathe." Eliphaz had come to console him, but in his attempt he only added more weight to his affliction. Job would not repent for something he hadn't done. His suffering made no sense, but his faith remained unshaken. Then suddenly, Bildad, the Shuhite, decided to speak. To him, the situation was straightforward. God is just, and if Job's children died, it must have been because they sinned. With a stern look, he said to him, "How long will you speak empty words like a fierce wind? If you sought God with humility, if you pleaded with him sincerely, if you were pure and upright, God would rise on your behalf and restore your home." Bildad tried to give hope, though his tone still carried judgment. "Your beginning may have been small, but your end will be great if you return to God. Inquire of the past generations. The ancient wise knew the truth. God does not forsake the righteous nor support the wicked. Never has an innocent perished. Those who sow evil will reap it. By the breath of God they perish." For him, the solution was simple. If Job were upright, God would restore him. But if his suffering continued, wasn't it a sign that he needed to acknowledge his fault? Job lifted his eyes, wearied beyond measure. His friends kept insisting that his suffering must be the result of his own sins, but he knew that no man could truly justify himself before God. "What you say is true, but how can anyone argue with God? He is not like me that we might debate face to face. God is wise, powerful, unyielding. He stretched out the heavens with his hands, and his wonders are beyond counting. Yet even if he passes by me, I do not see him. Even if he acts, I cannot comprehend him. Even if I were righteous, I could not defend myself. All I can do is plead with him. The world lies in the grasp of the wicked. Judges are blind. If it isn't God who allows this, then who? God has already condemned me. Why should I keep trying?" Finally, his voice broke. "My God, why do you treat me this way? What have I done to deserve this punishment? I don't want to go on living. My soul is weary of this life. Why did you create me, only to make me suffer?" He reached his hands toward the sky, searching for an answer. But there was no voice, no sign, just the heavy weight of divine silence. If Eliphaz's words had been a wound, and Bildad's a ruthless blow, then Zophar's were a dagger thrust deep into Job's heart. Zophar the Naamathite looked at Job with a stern gaze. To him, everything was straightforward. Job had sinned and was now facing his rightful punishment. There was no mystery, no room for debate. "Will all this talk go unanswered?" he sneered. "Will you still insist on your innocence?" His eyes flashed with anger. To Zophar, Job wasn't a victim, he was a fool refusing to admit his wrongdoing. If only God would speak to you and reveal the truth. Zophar leaned in, offering a bitter smile as he delivered the cruelest part of his speech. God is punishing you less than you deserve. If you would truly set your heart right, if you would reach out to God and turn away from wickedness, then you would be restored. His message was clear. Job needed to humble himself, acknowledge God's justice, and accept his punishment. But Job was beyond holding back. This time, his response was not just tinged with pain. It was full of fury. He stood tall, his face hardened by suffering. "You all think you possess the wisdom of God." He looked at them with disdain. "Have you become the spokesman for the Almighty? Do you think that only you understand the truth?" His patience had run thin. Job could no longer hold back. His friends had judged him, accused him, treated him like an unrepentant sinner. But he knew that his suffering was senseless, that his life had been upright, that his faithfulness to God was genuine. If he couldn't find justice among men, then he would speak directly to God. He lifted his face to the heavens, his eyes filled with tears, and with a trembling voice, he called out to the Almighty. "My God, why do you treat me as if I am your enemy? If there is anything in me that condemns me, tell me. If I have sinned, show me. If I am guilty, why don't you forgive me and put an end to this?" The words left his lips with the last strength he had. He did not understand the suffering. He had no answers. He saw no justice. But he continued to trust in God. Job was broken, yet he still believed. With conviction, he declared, "Even if he slays me, I will trust in him." Suddenly, the wind began to rise, a gentle breeze quickly turning into a whirlwind. God's voice thundered from the storm. "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Gird yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." Job, who had pleaded for an audience with God, now found himself face to face with the Almighty. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Who stretched the measuring line across it?" Job could hardly breathe. God was not explaining his suffering. He wasn't providing reasons. He was revealing Job's insignificance. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? Have you ever commanded the morning in your days? Have you shown the dawn its place? Job felt his heart shrink within him. God owed him no explanations. He was the creator. The entire universe depended on his will. For the first time, he understood the most difficult truth to accept. God is infinitely greater than man can comprehend. Job had demanded answers, but God offered perspective. And faced with the weight of his glory, Job was left completely speechless. God spoke to him again. "Will you still contend with the Almighty? Let him who accuses God answer." Job felt an overwhelming weight within him shatter. He had nothing left to say, nothing to argue, nothing to demand. Then the Lord continued saying, "Will you discredit my justice to vindicate yourself? Will you nullify my judgment?" A chill ran through Job's body. That was precisely what he had done. He had wanted God to explain his suffering. He had longed for God to prove that he, Job, was innocent. But now he understood that God's justice required no explanation. God began to describe his creation in even greater detail. He spoke of the behemoth, a majestic beast he had made, with bones like iron bars and a strength that no one could tame. He spoke of Leviathan, an unbeatable sea monster, with fire erupting from its mouth and eyes that shone like the dawn. No one could challenge it. No one could subdue it. If no one can face these creatures I have created, who then can challenge me? Job could no longer hold back. Bowing deeply, he fell in the dust and confessed, his voice trembling. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. His heart was surrendered. Before, he had spoken without understanding. He had questioned without seeing God's vastness. God didn't provide answers, he gave his presence. And that was enough. Job, the man who had lost everything, now had it all, not because his suffering had been explained, but because he had witnessed the glory of God. In that moment, he repented in dust and ashes. But the story wasn't over yet. God turned his gaze to Job's friends, who throughout all this time had spoken without true comprehension. The Lord said to them, My anger burns against you, for you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. Job, the one who had suffered, the one who had cried out, was justified by God. His friends, who had accused him, were now in danger of judgment. God instructed them to bring an offering and make sacrifices, but added something surprising. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept him. Job, the man they had scorned and judged, was now to intercede for their souls. And Job did so. There was no resentment in his heart. He prayed for those who had wounded him with their words, and when he did, something incredible happened. The Lord restored his life. He gave him back double all that he had lost. The friends and family who had abandoned him now returned to comfort him and bring him riches. His livestock flourished once more, and God didn't just restore him, he multiplied him, but the most beautiful part was yet to come. God blessed him with new children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and these daughters were the most beautiful in all the land. Their names reflected the beauty and blessing of this new chapter in life. Jemimah, meaning radiant day, like the dawn after a long night. Kezia, symbolizing the fragrance of spices, a token of purity and delight. Ķirin-Happuch, standing for horn of antimony, a symbol of honor and splendor. The sun rose over the land of Uz, illuminating fields that once lay in ruins. Job now walked among his multiplied flocks, surrounded by his children, witnessing with his own eyes what he never thought he would see again. Yet his greatest treasure was no longer his wealth, nor his livestock, nor even his restored family. His greatest treasure was his faith, stronger than ever. He now understood what once was beyond his grasp. God is greater than human understanding can fathom. His justice isn't measured by human standards, nor is his love only reflected in prosperity or suffering. God is sovereign, and his will is perfect, even if man cannot comprehend it. He no longer needed answers. He had seen the glory of God, and that was enough. The man who once lamented his existence now enjoyed a blessed life. Years went by. Job lived for another 140 years. He saw his children, his grandchildren, and even his great-grandchildren. He passed away old and full of life, at peace. Job's story wasn't one of suffering, it was a story of redemption. Job never received the answers he sought. God did not explain the reason for his suffering, nor did he reveal the celestial conversation between himself and Satan or detail the purpose behind Job's trial. But Job received something far greater. He received God. The Lord showed him the universe, the vastness of creation, and the insignificance of man in the face of his glory. And at that moment, Job understood. He had heard of God by ear, but now he had seen him with his own eyes, and that was enough. This was his true ending, his real reward, not the wealth, not the restoration of his family, but having seen God with his own eyes. Now, the question is for you. Will you trust in God even when you don't understand the reasons why? Leave your answer in the comments box and share your faith story with us. Thank you so much for watching this channel, and if you enjoyed it, hit the like button and share this video with your loved ones who might need this message. Blessings to you and your family. Amen.